X01.
Hello, everyone. My name is Chamzit. I'm joined by my colleagues Tunji and Anthony, and I'll be starting off our presentation on leader humility. We'll be exploring why humility matters so much in leadership today and what it really means based on the work of Maldonado, Vera, and Spangler in 2022. Before I start, I'd like to throw a question to you to sit with. When you think of a great leader, what do you envision? Humility or power? When you think of great leaders, humility might not be the first trait that comes to mind, but as we'll see, it's one of the most powerful. So, why should we care about leader humility? According to Maldonado and colleagues, humility is no longer just a personal virtue. It's becoming a strategic leadership capability. Research shows that humble leaders create more trusting and engaged teams. They listen deeply, give credit, and empower others. In times of uncertainty, like during crisis or rapid change, humble leaders tend to perform better because they're open to learning and collaboration rather than pretending to have all the answers. Organizations are also beginning to actively look for humility when hiring or promoting leaders because it leads to better long term performance and healthier team dynamics. Let's look at humility in action. Satya Nadella of Microsoft, like we learned about in class a few weeks ago, talks about shifting from a know it all to a learn it all mindset, showing openness and a willingness to admit limits. Jacinda Ardern demonstrated humility through empathy and collaboration, often crediting others for successes. And Warren Buffett, despite being one of the world's richest men, remains modest, grounded, and transparent. Just to give you a little bit of insight, Warren is known for admitting mistakes publicly. In his 2017 letter to shareholders, he said, and I quote, "I made a big mistake with Tesco. That was costly and entirely my fault." He didn't blame advisors or market conditions. He took full responsibility. This transparency and self-awareness are hallmarks of leader humility. Fun fact, he still resides in the same Omaha home he bought in 1958 for about $31,000, which goes further to show that his sense of self-worth isn't tied to wealth or status. Now, let's define humility more precisely. Maldonado et al. Describe it as both a dispositional trait, something that's part of a person's character, and a behavioral pattern, something that's demonstrated in action. And it generally consists of three main elements: self awareness, or knowing both your strengths and your limits; appreciation of others, meaning you recognize others' talents instead of dominating; and openness to learning, being willing to seek feedback and admit mistakes. So, humility isn't about low confidence, it's about balanced confidence. It's also important to note that humility doesn't negate ambition or competitiveness, which is a common misconception about humble leaders. Humility can exist alongside a strong drive for achievement. It simply grounds that drive in self awareness and respect for others. This idea aligns with what Apple CEO Tim Cook said in his 2019 Stanford commencement speech. He warned against people who want credit without responsibility and urged leaders to match their ambition with humility, a humility of purpose. His message reminds us that humility doesn't weaken ambition, it gives it direction and meaning. It's also useful to contrast humility with more traditional leadership traits. On the left, we see traits like overconfidence and self promotion. They can make a leader appear strong, but often limit learning and connection. On the right, humility reframes leadership. It's about awareness, appreciation, and openness, traits that build trust and collaboration. In short, humility balances confidence with empathy. To conclude my part of this presentation, humility matters because it's what allows leaders to stay grounded, connected, and adaptable. It fosters trust, inclusion, and team learning, which are crucial in today's workplaces. As leaders, cultivating humility can make us not just more effective or more human in how we lead. I'll now hand over to Tunji, who will discuss how personality factors link to leader humility.
Thank you, Chamzit. One of the many questions the article explored is how leaders' humility relate to personality and how culture and gender influences its expression and perception. Now, let's see how humility is connected to personality. The article explains that leader humility stems from personality traits. There are observable behaviors, as we shown in the left side of our presentation, that showcase a leader humility. Some of them, transparency, respect for diverse views, among others. These behaviors are grouped into what is known as humility dimensions, and there are 5 of them: self-awareness, appreciation of others, teachability, low self-focus, self-transcendent pursuits. And these dimensions are the lens through which the personality traits are evaluated. Now, let's look at the link between personality traits and these humility dimensions. How are they connected? What is the correlation between the humility dimensions and the leader personality traits? The article examined the behaviors of 102 American CEOs together with their personality traits. Their findings shows that 3 of the 5 personality traits are all positively linked to humility. Conscientiousness showed the strongest tie among all the 5 personality traits. And the other 2, agreeableness and openness, each have 2 connection, positive correlation to some of these personality traits and the humility dimension. However, extraversion and neuroticism showed mixed effects. That is, some of the humility dimensions are positively linked to some of these personality traits, while in some other cases, there is a negative correlation. And what this showed was that sometimes extraversion and neuroticism can support or hinder humility in a leader. Overall, a mix of conscientiousness, openness to experience, and agreeableness have been found to be the core of high leader humility. Now, how does culture and gender come into play? How does these 2 factors impact expression and perception of humility? The article explored this area further. It shows that humility, though, is valued universally, but it is expressed differently across cultures and genders, therefore making humility neither culture nor gender neutral. For example, in a high-power distant cultures like Singapore, humility shows relational respect and deference, not weakness. However, in a Western world like the US, where it is much of individualistic culture, humility reflects authenticity and self-awareness. When examined through gender lens, however, women face a double bind. Humility is expected but can undermine authority. However, in a highly masculine environment, humble men risk being seen as weak. What is the leadership implication of this? Effective leaders practice contextual humility by balancing modesty with confidence and adapting to cultural and gender expectations. In summary, the article finds that while personality is linked to humility, its expression and perception is influenced by culture and gender. Our critique of the research findings. First of all, the strengths. We saw that the findings is based on quantitative analysis, which link personality and humility. And that is where the correlation analysis was established through the study of the 102 American CEOs. It expands leadership psychology beyond moral virtue. It established HR criteria that could be used to take advantage of humility, even in terms of recruitment, and many others. However, we find a lot of shortcomings. One is oversimplification of the impact of humility on performance. It's only portray positive effects, but is that true? Is that only positive in all areas? Second, conceptual discussion on culture and gender impact, but lack any empirical analysis. There's also too much focus on exemplars that align with the author's opinion, which creates a kind of a confirmation bias, because we did not to look at other CEOs who do not portray some of these attributes. Finally, argument that humility is personality-based contradict the malleableness of humility or vice versa. I will now hand it over to my colleague, Anthony, to take us through the rest of the presentation.
Awesome. Thank you, Tunji. That being said, we'll move into our action agenda to develop humility in leaders. The article discusses the development of humility as a trait in leaders, noting that it is a skill that can be learned and taught, developed, promoted, incentivized, and rewarded. Discussing organizational self-determination and individually facilitating the compensity of leaders to develop humility within themselves by setting the standard and creating the right environment to allow such. The article draws attention to organizations such as Apple, Southwest Airlines, Nokia, and Microsoft that have set the stage for the development of humility in leaders and the usage of behavioral modeling as the mechanism to develop humility, pointing out culture at the top, institutionalization of humility and organizational values, creating a figure with a concrete list of actions managers, coaches, and mentors are able to utilize and set the stage for and develop humility in leaders. Continuing on, the article discusses personality profiles, noting humility is a quiet virtue. The paradoxical statement, claiming one is humble, suggests a lack of humility. Discussed is the reliance on the MBTI Myers-Briggs Type Indicator Personality Assessment to aid in human resource management. MBTI based around 4 dimensions, each separated into 2 levels, as you can observe on the slide, resulting in 16 possible personality profiles. Noting specifically that humility in individuals is associated with openness to experience, N, and feeling, F, focusing on people and emotions. Going back to the point on the development of leader humility, it is important for organizations to be able to develop 4 traits associated with humility within their leaders and promote these within their organizations. But on the other hand, it's important to maintain balance as well. You can't select out a whole group of people solely based off of their MBTI, and promotion and hiring should balance this with competency, performance, along with multiple other factors. Continuing on, the article discusses the interplay between leader humility and narcissism, noting that humility exists on a continuum. While evidence has shown humility in leaders is positive for organizations, encouraging innovation, creativity, and a people-first mentality, the opposite has also been observed with narcissistic leaders, such as the individuals here, President Donald Trump, the 45th and 47th president, Jeff Bezos, CEO of Amazon, and Elon Musk, CEO of Tesla, SpaceX, Twitter, OpenAI, who preside over great failure and success. It notes that humility and narcissism can simultaneously exist to produce positive outcomes, pointing out most famously Steve Jobs, described as a humble narcissist who was infamously difficult to work with and arrogant during his first tenure as CEO of Apple. However, during his second tenure, he came back after being humbled by his failures during his first tenure and led Apple to great fortune and fame. Finally, we'll discuss leadership humility and crisis management. Humble leaders are conscientious, open to experience, open-minded, which leads them to keep a more open mind and level head during crises. Understanding that they don't know everything and anything, allowing them to connect better with others, keeping them aware of blind spots, myopia, and avoiding overconfidence to see the bigger picture in situations, facilitating for better crisis management. The article notes that agreeableness is associated with humility and better crisis management, which we find subject to debate. Agreeableness, to an extent, aids in compromise, agreement, and solution finding. However, being a yes man, doormat, to be walked over, is most definitely not associated with positive crisis management outcomes. That being said, we'll move into our key takeaways here. Humility fosters psychological safety, team learning, coexisting with confidence. It's not weakness. Humble leaders handle crises and feedback better, and organizations can screen for humility when hiring or promoting leaders. That being said, that concludes our presentation. Thank you.